I'm really emotional for someone who grew up in the Philippines. And
there's a sentence Eala said on center court that most people watching didn't even let her finish, because by the time she got halfway through it, she was already in tears. Just because I'm emotional does not mean I'm satisfied. That's the line. Sit with that for a second, because most players who just knocked out a defending Grand Slam champion would be celebrating. She was crying and still talking about what's coming next.
it was a very different experience for me from last year.
This is a story of what actually happened that day, why it broke her composure on the biggest court in tennis, and why. Even through the tears, she made it clear this is nowhere near the end.
Every day after school with my ruffled socks and my light-up shoes.
Let's start with the match itself, because this wasn't some routine win that got emotional afterward. This was a genuine battle, and it needed to be because of who was standing across the net. IGA's Świątek walked into that third-round match as the defending Wimbledon champion. Not just a good player, the reigning title holder on the exact court they were about to play on.
I felt like I can just let it go and just enjoy the moment.
And this wasn't the first time these two had crossed paths on a big stage either. Back in 2025, at the Miami Open, a 19-year-old Eala shocked the entire tennis world by beating Świątek in straight sets, becoming the first player ranked outside the top 100 to beat her in 4 years. There's history here. There's a rivalry building in real time, and it clearly gets something extra out of Eala every time these two share a court. The first set was brutal, not in the sense of one-sided domination, but in the sense of pure tension. It ran an hour and 24 minutes on its own, and it came down to one of the longest tiebreaks you'll see at this level. A 20-point tiebreak, decided 7 points to 6. Anyone who's played competitive tennis knows what that kind of tiebreak does to your nerves. Every single point feels like it could be the one that decides everything, and it just keeps going, refusing to end. Eala won it. Here's the part of her game that doesn't get talked about enough, and it's worth pausing on, because it's genuinely new territory for her career. Her return game. In this match, she won 68% of the points played on Świątek's second serve. Think about that number for a second. More than 2 out of every 3 times Świątek put in a second serve, Eala was winning the point anyway. That's not luck. That's a player who has completely reworked how she reads and attacks second serves, standing in close, taking time away, and turning what's usually a defensive moment for the returner into an offensive weapon. A year ago, Eala's game was built more around grinding rallies and mental toughness. Now she's actively hunting second serves like a predator. That shift alone is a big reason she's a different, more dangerous player on grass this season than she's ever been before. And it showed in the numbers across the whole match. Świątek committed more than twice as many unforced errors as Eala did, 44 compared to just 21. Eala broke her serve 5 times. This wasn't Eala surviving and hoping. This was Eala imposing her will on one of the best players of this era, methodically, point by point. After that draining first set, both players needed a proper reset. They each went back to the locker room for an extended break before returning to the court. And when Eala came back out, she came out sharper. She broke the love almost immediately, built a commanding double break, and never let Świątek find her footing again. The second set went to Eala, 6-2. Now here's the moment that actually matters for this whole story. The moment right after the final point, when Świątek's return sailed wide, and the match was over. Eala didn't leap in the air. She didn't sprint to the net pumping her fists. She fell to her knees. Center court rose to its feet around her, and she just stayed there for a moment, completely overtaken by what had just happened. When she got up for her on-court interview, the composure that had carried her through that brutal first-set tiebreak was gone. She started answering a question about how it felt to have just beaten the defending champion, and you could hear her voice already starting to catch. She said she didn't really know how to describe it, that she was in the second week of a Grand Slam, that Świątek is a phenomenal player and a genuinely nice person, and that she felt grateful just to have shared that court with her. And then she said something that tells you everything about where this emotion was actually coming from. She said that for someone like Świątek, who's won so many Grand Slams, or someone like Serena Williams or Venus Williams, a moment like this might look small. But for someone who grew up the way she did, in a country that had never had a single Grand Slam-seeded player in its history, this was everything. That's when she couldn't finish the sentence. The tears just came. After she gathered herself, she added one more detail, and it's a kind of small, specific memory that makes a story like this land so much harder than any highlight reel could. She talked about walking to training after school every single day with her brother and her grandfather, in ruffled socks, in little kid shoes with her chubby cheeks. That image, a small girl in mismatched socks walking to a court in the Philippines with her grandfather, next to the reality of her kneeling on Wimbledon's center court having just beaten a defending champion. That contrast is the entire emotional core of this moment. And here's what separates Eala from a lot of athletes who have emotional breakthroughs like this. She didn't let the tears become the whole story. Almost immediately after, she made that pointed comment. Being emotional doesn't mean she's satisfied. She wasn't treating this as a finish line. She was treating it as fuel. Let's talk about what this win actually means in the bigger picture, because it's not just a nice moment. It's a genuine changing of the guard on that side of the draw. By losing, Świątek didn't just exit the tournament. Her title defense ended completely, and she's now projected to fall out of the top 10 in the rankings, losing over 1,800 points in one match. And she wasn't the only big name to go down that day, either. Just an hour earlier, second seed and former champion Elena Rybakina was also eliminated, beaten by 25th seed Elise Mertens. Two former Wimbledon champions, gone from the draw within the same hour. That's the level of upset weather that swept through the tournament that day, and Eala was right in the middle of it. With this result, Eala improved her head-to-head record against Świątek to 2 wins and 1 loss. She now, remarkably, has the edge in this rivalry. She's also built her overall record against top 10 opponents to 7 wins and 4 losses, a number that would be impressive for a seasoned veteran, let alone a 21-year-old who was ranked 147th in the world barely a year and a half ago. And here's a detail that puts everything in context. Coming into this year's Wimbledon, Eala's career record in Grand Slam main draws was just 1 win and 5 losses. 1 and 5. Grand Slams had genuinely been the format where she struggled the most, despite all her success on the smaller tours. This win over Świątek wasn't just a signature victory. By her own team's framing, it was her first true signature win at a major, the moment where all that WTA-level success finally translated onto the biggest stage tennis has to offer. She didn't get there by accident either. This breakthrough had been building for months. A runner-up finish at Eastbourne, 2 WTA 125 titles, one of them coming in Birmingham just a few weeks before Wimbledon even started. Every piece of that run was quietly setting up this exact moment. And so what happens now? Up next for Eala is a rematch with 13 seed Jasmine Paolini, the 2024 Wimbledon finalist, who dismantled Maria Sakkari in the previous round. 6 games to 1 and 6 games to 2, a serious opponent, and no easy path forward. But here's an interesting wrinkle. Eala already has the edge in their head-to-head. Earlier this year, in Dubai, she beat Paolini in a tight 3-set battle. She's walked this exact road before against this exact opponent and won. Whatever happens in that next match, one thing has already been permanently written into tennis history. Alex Eala is now the first Filipino player, male or female, in the entire Open era, to reach the second week of a Grand Slam tournament. Not just a good run, not just a career best result, a first for an entire nation at the tournament that matters more than almost any other in the sport. That's why the tears on center court weren't really about one match. They were about every single day of training after school, every mile from a court in the Philippines to a court in London, and everything it took to close that distance. And true to her own words in that interview, being emotional never meant she was satisfied. It meant she was just getting started.